Thank you, Jackie. Hopefully everybody can hear me okay. Again, my name is Marcia Simmons. I'm currently the Chief Operations Officer at NCVirtual. However, before about a month and a half, almost 2 months coming here, I was actually head of school as well as administrator, middle school and high school for North Carolina Virtual Academy, which was located, the main office is located out of Durham. It's so good to see where some of you are coming from and in here, because I'm actually familiar with Ignite from Durham, as well as I am a native from Vance County. So born and raised, grew up in Henderson. So I see Vance Virtual Village Academy is here. So welcome, and hopefully you can get some things out of kind of the trial and error that we did. NCVirtual Academy was started in 2015. So we were a fully online K through 12 school before the pandemic hit. So we had live instruction, live classes, and therefore all of our teachers were virtual. We did not do a blended model where some teachers taught, in face-to-face and taught online. All teachers, all students were strictly virtual. And so over those last 7 years, we kind of trial and error found some things that worked, didn't work, things we still, even to this day, have struggles dealing with when it comes to evaluating of teachers. And so hopefully you can get some insights from that you can use going forward. All right, so NCEES. If you know the NCEES standard evaluation teacher rubric, all of us are familiar with it. If you were a teacher, you were evaluated using this rubric. This is my 22nd year. So when I first started teaching the first 10 years, I was evaluated on the standard teacher evaluation rubric. Teachers still use it now. One of the things though is with the pandemic, and even before that, when we were doing strictly online, some of the things are hard when you're dealing with the online environment. And so from this, as you can see, this is one of the standard rubrics that has the 5 different standards in the 5 core areas, and then you have the individual substandards under there. So one of the first questions I just want to pose to the group right now is, of these 5 standards that I have listed here, which one do you think seemed the easiest to evaluate for a virtual teacher? Or if you've done evaluations using the NCEES rubric in your virtual academies, which are the ones that are easiest for you to do in terms of standard 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5? If you can put that in the chat. So which of the 5 standards do you think is the easiest to evaluate a teacher in the online environment? All of them are hard? When you look at the sub parts of it, it can be. I would say 3 or 4 would be the easiest to do. Teachers know the content they teach. They facilitate learning for the students. Standard 4, I see that. Okay, respectful environment. Okay. Most of you're not that far off. Those are the things that I would have said as well as the easiest. So on the next slide, I went with, when we used to go through and do evaluations, we started with the easier standards first. And that for us was standards 1, 3, and 5. In terms of standards 1, what activities in terms of teachers know, teachers lead their profession, what items you can look for that shows that the face-to-face teacher can demonstrate in a variety of ways. Like, how are they a leader in their, not PLC because it's not face-to-face, but ELC. So our school, the teachers, just like if they were in a regular brick and mortar, they still had to have ELC meeting times, which, like teachers of content, as well as teachers across grade levels had to still meet and have ELCs and look at their data and compare their data from one teacher to the next in terms of how students are looking at standards. So participation in an ELC is did a person step up and become a mentor, a lead of that ELC? Also, how is the teacher interacting for the better of the school? in terms of, are they a member of the school improvement team? Even though you're a virtual environment, we still had a school improvement team, still had to go through and have a school improvement plan. Who are our leaders on that in terms of taking an active role in on those types of things? Also, you have your mentor teacher, especially, I think this is one of the hardest things that we ended up having to implement from looking at our first 2 years in operations. Even though a teacher can be a great teacher, outstanding teacher in a brick and mortar traditional school setting, when they then have to transition solely to online, even the greatest teacher struggles. And so one of the things that we implemented is that every new teacher coming in, brand new, was assigned a mentor teacher. Even if you had 15 years in the classroom, you still got a mentor teacher in the online environment your first year of teaching, because things always come up that you didn't expect when you were in brick and mortar. And so what teachers step up and do those roles as a mentor teachers for your new teachers. We also in our school had student teachers. It's, you know, teachers that wanted to automatically coming out of UNC Pembroke or UNC Asheville knew they wanted to go and become an online teacher. So we had student teachers actually paired up with us from those universities. And so who were their teachers that they mentors that they were paired up to understand those types of things. If you haven't thought about student teachers or paired up with a university, that's one way to increase your pipeline, as well as those teachers to get valuable experience before they actually teach on their own. As well as teachers going through national boards. You know, teachers still want the national board pay, they still want to do those things. So all of those things are something that even activities that they normally would do in face-to-face environment that they can do online. Another thing that was easy for us to go through and evaluate was, how does the teacher cover content while teaching? All teachers are specialized in a content area, but it more so in the online environment is, how do they differentiate that content? Are they just putting up one PowerPoint and just reading the PowerPoint and just going through the content for all students and not taking into account the different varieties of the students' learning abilities? Whereas you can see that easily in the classroom, but it's harder to do in the online environment, especially if a kid doesn't turn on their camera, maybe doesn't type in the chat, or doesn't always participate when you're asking a polling question. So then how does the teacher actually differentiate the content? That's what we look more so for when we were evaluating that piece in terms of the teacher cover the content. And then as well as in an online environment, I'm doing one of the things that I used to tell the teachers not to do. I was talking the most. It was a teacher-led presentation of the content, the items, instead of the student-led. And so one of the things we had to put in place was PD for our teachers. Okay, in a brick and mortar setting, you're used to being able to walk around the classroom while you're talking and touch Johnny to make sure Johnny is following along, or, you know, tap and look at what they've written down to see if they're following along with the lesson. You can't do that in the online environment because they're not with you. So what are other ways to make sure they're following along? You have to put in more breaks where you talk for 5 minutes, stop, put in an activity in which the kids actually have to participate and do something, whether it's polling, whether it's typing the answers in the chat. And even if a person is not comfortable typing in a chat to the whole group, you still have to train the kids that it's okay as long as you send me a private chat message, that is okay, and you get the participation points, because we have different people that may not be familiar with the online. But that requires PD, professional development, of teaching the teachers how to do more student-led content and less teacher-led driven content. And then last but not least, one of the easiest things to do is how does the teacher use previous assessments to tailor instructions for the day? Again, we had to incorporate PD for our teachers on what type of assessments or what type of data are you looking at on a daily basis to measure, did your kids get that content? Did they get the understanding for that day? And so that after the first, I would say 2 years trial and error, as administrators, we had to come and say, okay, in the online environment, I'm sure y'all know, there's 50 million tools out there that now teachers can use, but not all teachers know how to use all those tools appropriately or in the correct way. And so as an administration team, we had to come and say, you know what, we need to pick at least 2 tools that all teachers are going to use across the board for our school to measure how students gain their understanding. So that when I, as an administrator, go in and evaluate, I at least need to be able to see, did they use polling? Did they use Go Formative? That was one of the tools we picked, Go Formative. Or did they use Nearpod to understand and gauge how the students are using their assessment? But that takes planning in advance to say, hey, which tools are you going to use? Whether those 2 tools. So Nearpod is a tool where the teacher can assign tasks or activities, and it really works well if you want to do like this whole group session and you don't want to put kids in an individual breakout room and the teacher has to go to each individual breakout room to see if they are working on the item. The teacher logs into Nearpod, assigns the Nearpod activity for that standard to the students. When the teacher's logged in, it automatically shows where the student, which student has logged in on one screen for the teacher, and then the teacher can see the students working individually on those assignments. So it's real-time data that the teacher can see. And it especially works if you have a double monitor. So you have your laptop and you have a double monitor with has the Nearpod, and I can see, student number 3, Johnny, hasn't logged into Nearpod. I can then send a private message to Johnny. Hey, Johnny, are you having trouble logging into Nearpod? Do you have the link? Do you have the code, etc.? And then you can also, it's a great formative assessment because the teacher can see that right there in real time, especially like math. If the kids are working out the steps of a problem, that I can see, oh, Susie missed step 2. So that's why her answer looks different than all the others. They're putting in some of the other, in the chat, some other areas like Pear Deck is one of those. Go Formative is another one of those. Go Formative is an online kind of formative assessments where you can give a simple 5-question assessment, and the same thing. It doesn't automatically have to be an A, B, C, D, because we want to see the thought process of the students and how they're working. And if I was in a brick and mortar, I could just walk around and look at their paper. Because I can't do that in an online environment, I need a tool that I can log in and see when the student is writing step 1, step 2, step 3, those type of things. Okay. And so those things, how does a teacher incorporate those type of assessments into their daily content lesson? So it got to the point that the teachers, of course, we had to give training on Go Formative and Nearpod and how to use it. But after a while, I could go in and say, yes, they're on it. The kids, the teacher can even see 95% of the kids are on it for a particular standard because of their using the activity. And the good things about these is if you have a class where there's a co-teacher in there, the co-teacher can even have their own login to that same lead teacher's class, and the co-teacher can even see their specific EC students and how they're doing it in real time as well. So therefore, then the co-teachers can later on, if they have the individual EC sessions, student support sessions that they have to do because of their IEP 504, etc., then they can also see where Johnny was missing on those to pull in, even though they're not with the teacher. Okay. Next slide. So if those slide standards are the easiest to evaluate, then what about the others? We still got 2 more in there. So I started with the easiest of the 2 hardest, I would say. Standard 4, teachers facilitate learning for students. Yes, here we go. And so one of those things is, before any administrators go in and evaluate, 2 things need to happen. Number 1, all the administrators need to be on the same page of what they're looking for, what they're expecting to see. And number 2, they need to communicate that in advance to the teachers, not a week before they go and do the evaluation, not a month before, but almost the semester before. So in the spring semester, towards the end, we started communicating that to the teachers. Hey, for the upcoming fall, these are the things that we want to see. And one of the things was, if we're expecting all teachers to do Nearpod, then we had to implement Nearpod training in our, the teacher work days at the end of the year. So we did that at the end of the year. a refresher at the beginning of the year for more in-depth, so that teachers could use planning time to incorporate those types of assessments when they're doing their daily lesson plans or their daily activities for the day. So you have to have communication is a must. And I would say the sooner, the earlier you can do it, the better, so that everybody is on the same page. Once you do that, things that the administrators and teachers also need to make sure is, for us, one of the things I just said, integrates the standards, or it has in there, the substandard integrates and utilizes technology. You as an admin team, as well as teachers, may need to decide, hey, we're going to pick 2 to 3 resources that all teachers are going to use. And we also want to use those resources that don't have accessibility issues, because that's the other piece. You have to make sure that all students can access the resources that you're using. At our school, we had students that were blind. And so with that, we had to make sure that certain resources we were using, Nearpod, Go Formative, also had the read aloud facilities or capabilities in those courses, and that the teachers knew how to deploy the read aloud for those students, so that they could follow along and keep up in the online environment. But sometimes people don't think of those types of things when you're looking at resources. You just think of, oh, this is a great tool, but you got to look at it as all students that may be in your class. Another thing is, if students work in teams or develop leadership qualities, when do actually administrators go in and do? One of the things it's easy for an administrator to fall back on is, just like right now, this is being recorded. So we had it where all of our class teachers recorded all of their lessons, and then they published it to the LMS system. So therefore, if a kid missed because they were sick, they could always go back and watch the recording of the assignment and always of the lesson for that day, and still do the assignment. So it was never hey, I was out for 2 days, what did we cover? I need to get my work. It was always there. At the beginning, administrators kind of relied on that. Oh, well, I can't go in because something came up, an issue came up. As administrators, something always comes up. And so they were like, oh, well, I don't have to worry about going in. I can just go watch the recording and see and do my evaluation based on recording. But what we learned is, depending on the tool you use, if teachers putting kids in group work and putting them in breakout rooms, like here, we could put them in breakout rooms in Zoom, the recording doesn't record at the time the breakout rooms. It only records what was in the main room. And so for that standard in here, in terms of students, help students work in teams and develop leadership qualities, the administrators were never seeing that, because that was done in the breakout rooms where you had the student leaders in the breakout rooms. And so we had to make it a priority that, guess what? Yes, things come up, but we have to put time aside to make sure we're in those classrooms live, because if I'm in there live, I can go into each of the breakout rooms and see that how the kids are working in groups and how the kids are being peer leaders in those breakout rooms. So that's one thing to keep in mind, as well as use a variety of methods to assess. Although I said you need to make sure or try to pick 2 to 3 resources, it doesn't mean that if I pick Nearpod, I use Nearpod every single day, every single class, because just like in brick and mortar, kids get bored. Oh, another Nearpod. Oh, another Kahoot. We use Kahoot in every single class. I'm tired of Kahoot every single day. So even if you're doing 2 or 3 resources, mix it up. If you're using a Nearpod today on Monday, you may not use another Nearpod until Thursday, because you're using one of the other 2 resources on Tuesday and Wednesday. So if I do a evaluation or observation on Monday, and then I just do a quick pop in on Tuesday, I should expect to see something different in terms of the tools for assessments, those types of things. And then the other part of that is, again, when you're communicating with your staff, what is the expectations? Is the expectations that even with kids' participation, kids can participate by, long as they're putting their answers in the chat, that counts as participation. Because we even had participation grades. So our teachers added a participation grade towards their overall, grades for the 9 weeks, etc. Does chat count? Does doing the polling count? Does things like having their microphone and camera on. You know, some kids are more up to talking on the microphone and raising their hand, and, you know, if their camera is on. So what does participation look like? What are the expectations for the kids in an online environment? Okay. The other standard on the next slide, that is one that's, this is what I'm gonna be honest with you, even after 7 years, there's part of this one, this standard, that we still had not gotten down to 100%. As you could probably say, teachers establish a respectful environment for a diverse population. So on the first side, I'm gonna go to the right before I go to what's up under the chart. This is where professional development is really key. Because in a face-to-face environment, you see I'm on the camera. In a face-to-face environment, there are cues that I can do just from body language that gets missed in the online environment, even if I'm on camera. In terms of tone, we used to have teachers go in and actually do a mock lesson before school started, a mock lesson of themselves teaching to other teachers or their mentor teacher, and then had them go back and watch that recording to see, rate your tone, rate your wait time when you're asking a question that you want people to actually respond to. Because those things that are seem easy in the brick and mortar environment can get rushed in the online environment. Sarcasm, you know, I was one that loved sarcasm in the brick and mortar, but the kids could see my face to know that I was just joking. That's one of the things that is hard in the online environment, even more so because they may not be able to see your face clearly to know you're joking. And so we had that professional development to say, hey, these are some things that even though you did it in brick and mortar, you may have to cut it out here until you build that relationship with the student so they know your ins and outs and your expectations. But that was something that we had to do as a professional development for teachers, to the point of, if you have not done it, I would say, just like in brick and mortar, where teachers come in almost like a week before, and, you know, they go through all of these things, that getting ready for the classrooms, et cetera. We actually, I wouldn't suggest it unless you can, but we actually backed it up an extra week, where we had all new teachers, anybody teaching for us for the first time, came a week before the veterans. And they had live professional development with a mentor, senior mentor teacher, on these types of items: tone in the classroom, hand gestures, what tools are you going to use, things such as doing a mock lesson. We had them to actually do a mock lesson in which I was in there, the mentor teacher, and we were the students. And I don't know anything about math. I'm not a math major, but I was in there acting like, hey, I know the answer, you know, polling and, you know, and just shouting out the answer in the chat, and just to see how the teacher was respond. Thanks, such and such, for that answer, but please remember to make your answer in the polling so I can capture it, and all students have the opportunity to present before the answer is revealed. So we had the teachers do a mock lesson the week before to get comfortable in that online environment. So mentorship is so crucial. I would say everybody that's new into online teaching, again, whether you're a beginning teacher or this is your 20th year, if this is your first time teaching an online environment, everybody needs to have a mentor. I would say that is the #1 thing that's most important when dealing with this in observation and feedback. And somebody that they can go to and ask for questions that is not in an evaluative role of them. So that's why it's so important. Say, hey, I'm having trouble with this. What's going on? Most of the time, those veteran teachers say, well, why are you worried about, you know, building that? I already have that in a PowerPoint or a handout. Let me go ahead and just send this to you. Don't worry about that. I'll send this to you, and to make things easier on them, because it is hard. Again, expectations for students when participating must be key. Those teachers, as you know, in brick and mortar, it's almost like, how do you lay out your classroom expectations during the first week or two of school? Teachers need to still do that for students. What is my expectation in terms of participating for this lesson? Even simple things of cameras, which I know can be hard to get all the kids turn their cameras on. But one of the things is, for our attendance piece, we stated, and was pushed out to the parents, pushed out to the students, everybody, that, hey, the expectation is all students and teachers and staff have their cameras on at the beginning of class. And after the first 10 minutes of class, cameras can go off as long as the students are still participating through polling, through chat, etc. Because sometimes, you know, with technology, when everybody has their camera on, it may slow down the actual interaction in the webinar in the session, depending on what types of tools that are there the teacher may be using. But the expectation was everybody has to have their camera on in the beginning, the first 10 minutes, and then the teacher would say, okay, you can turn off your cameras now, but please remember, you still need to participate in the class. So those things need to not only be shared with the teachers when there's doing the observations, but the teachers have to explain that and share that with the parents and the students as well in advance. Now, things that are still hard, was still hard for us, was that lovely bullet, sub-bullet B, incorporation of diversity. When you're in a brick and mortar student classroom, as an administrator that comes in and does observation, you can see pretty much which students are your white students, which students are your Black students, which students are your Hispanic students, which students are your Asian students. And you can see how often does the teacher call on a particular race of students or a particular gender of a student, etc. That's much more harder in the online environment, especially if the kids don't all have their cameras on, and we can't assume based upon a person's name what race they are, because the way my name is spelled, some people may pronounce it as Marcia, or they may pronounce it as Marcia, and it depends. And so those are one of the things in terms of incorporating diversity. What are some other unique ways to do that? And one of the things that, just like with the teachers lead their profession, that's something that you may not see in an actual classroom visit. Does it make sense when an administrator is going through that incorporation of diversity? We saw that in other aspects. It may not always been in the actual classroom when you're teaching, but what about clubs? Kids still want that social, emotional and interaction with their peers outside of the regular classroom. And so our school, after 2 years, we finally got it where we had clubs that the kids could do. And with those clubs, we had a wide range. We ended up having, I think, about 70 some clubs for any and everything that you can imagine of in a brick and mortar to the online environment. And so that was how we incorporated more diversity and cultural awareness. We had everything. We had gender clubs, we had racial clubs, we had even talent shows. We actually produced a live virtual and art and music talent show in which kids could come in, and of course they had to run it through the art teacher and the music teacher in advance. They had to submit what they wanted to do in advance and audition. But then during the live presentation, we had kids that would come in and they would sing, they would rap, they had their time slots. Other kids could come in and listen, those types of things. We had kids art gallery. So if you singing wasn't your thing, I cannot sing even though I try. We have it where kids could submit artwork in the different categories. I didn't even know there were so many different types of categories of artwork. And so we had a gallery walk as a breakout room, and there was different types of arts from, the digital camera to the drawing to the paintings, etc. And the kids actually got to vote. Everybody got to vote on, their top 3 in each of the categories. And we ended up awarding prizes at the end, for the best category in, digital art, best category in painting, those type of things. We even had students that actually did was in the ballet and dance. And so they recorded their session of them dancing, etc., and put that in a different breakout room. And it got so, we started with high school first, but it got so popular that the high school wanted to do it twice a year. So we ended up having to do it in the fall, and then we ended up having to do it in the spring. Well, remember, our school was K through 12. So we ended up, guess what? Middle school heard about it. So then we had to have a middle school and high school. And then the last year that I was there, elementary wanted to get on it. So we ended up having an art and talent show for K through 5. And so that was a way to incorporate diversity. The other thing is always keep in mind about students with special needs. Anything that you do, even with the art and the talent show, even with the clubs, it has to be accessible for everybody. So we have to do that pre-planning in advance. So kind of all of those, how do you use clubs for diversity, and what do your teachers do to set up things beforehand? And that kind of leads to my last slide, I do believe, which I know is my time is running out, which is questions for future thoughts or reflection going forward. How does your school account for diversity in the online environment if you're strictly online? What has been communicated to your teachers about what administrators expect to see when they come in and observe? What is your plan of action? Like what all of the things that I talked about, what can you do now to implement now or next quarter or next semester or even next year if you need to have more time to plan? So those are kind of some of the questions that I have for food for thought for you to take away and think about going forward. I did see one question in the chat, I do believe, Jacqueline, that I did not answer. I think one person said, well, what happens if a student doesn't turn on the cameras or want to turn on the cameras? Now, there are situations where we did run into IEP issues, et cetera, where it was part of the IEP that they didn't have to have the camera on because unfortunately that student had a medical condition and they didn't want to be seen on camera, et cetera. But that was one where because of the IEP, we made, of course, we accommodated the IEP. We said having the camera on is more about making sure the child participates. There are other ways for the child to participate. They can still type in the chat to the teacher, do the polling. And so as long as the child participates, the teacher knows that the kid is there and interacting. They can still do Nearpod and, you know, the other features. So it was more about not have the cameras was more about the participation, making sure the kid just didn't log in and walk away from the computer until it was time to log out at the end of that session.
I think this is really great. And I think that it would be awesome if a lot of our administrators could really tap into this, because I feel like so many times we have administrators who may not have the background in virtual learning themselves. And so they're coming in and they're looking at these accountability standards for us as educators, but even they are like, so how do I see this in action? And I guess realizing that we can make some specific guidelines that are more useful for the virtual school and still be, following the letter of what needs to be done within the NCEES observation cycle, and I think the teachers also as well, because sometimes we feel like, oh, well, we have to put on this live lesson, dog and pony show when in reality, we're doing video lessons, we're doing Nearpods, we're doing individual conferences and breakout rooms, and that is good teaching, not just putting up a PowerPoint and going through it. So I think that there's still a lot of like back and forth between the teachers and the administrators of not knowing how do we do this well, and sometimes I think even the teachers are like, I know at Ignite we were like, please look at our Canvas courses, because if you're not getting into our Canvas courses prior to observing us, you have no idea what we're doing. You don't see the breadth and the depth of the resources and the asynchronous activities that build to the synchronous activities if you're not engaging with the course material that we, at our school, we're building most of our stuff from scratch. And we really push for administrators to please look at that first, so that when you're in my live Zoom, you're seeing the fruition of what I've built. And then you can also see how what I'm doing with the students live carries over into the other asynchronous work.
I think that's a wonderful point of being sure that you're not just focusing in on the synchronous, but making sure that they're getting the full experience. And so certainly if that's not something that you all have talked about with your administrators before, I think that's a great place to begin. And using this, when we were planning for this session, we wanted to make sure that it wasn't something that would exclude teachers from participating in, because you're obviously the ones that are going through these observations, but saw it as a both and experience that hopefully if there are administrators on, that they can learn and benefit from it, but it also would provide ideas and strategies for teachers to take back if their principals weren't able to be here. So thank you so much for that.
So I want to say thank you again for all this wonderful content. Thank you so much, Marcia. And we want to give you some highlights of what's coming next for VSN.